Hello everyone, this is Photosynthesis for A-Level Biology, and I hope that this video is helpful for your studies. So, what is photosynthesis? Well, photosynthesis is the process where energy from light is used to make glucose. Here is the general equation. We have 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules to give us 1 molecule of glucose and 6 oxygen molecules. Over here, we have the structure of the chloroplast. Now, one important thing to know about the chloroplast is that it has a double membrane. Over here, double membrane. So we have our inner membrane, which is this part. We have our outer membrane, which is this part. We have the granum, which is a stack of the thylakoids. And over here is our stroma, where chemical reactions such as the Calvin cycle take place. We have a starch grain over here. And we have the lamella, which connects the thylakoids together. And over here, one singular is a thylakoid. And we have the thylakoid membrane over here, which is where the light reaction occurs. So, before I jump into photosynthesis and the reactions that take place, there are some basic concepts that you need to understand. So, photosynthesis makes glucose. However, in the Calvin cycle, it actually makes something called G3P, which you will later find out that this G3P will combine in a series of other reactions to make glucose. However, for the sake of A-level biology, all you need to know is that the Calvin cycle will produce glucose. However, it's G3P, which through a series of reactions will make glucose. So, plants store energy in the form of glucose, okay? This is why photosynthesis occurs. Respiration uses this glucose to produce energy. This equation is for respiration, and you also must know it for your exam. So chloroplasts contain photosynthetic pigments such as chlorophyll A, we also have chlorophyll B, and something called keratin. Now, these pigments are attached to proteins, which make a photosystem. We will see this photosystem in a membrane. So coenzymes are molecules that aid the function of an enzyme. Okay, a coenzyme in photosynthesis is NADPH or NADP+. So photosynthesis can be split into stages. We have number 1, our light-dependent reaction, meaning it requires light, and the main point is that light energy is converted into ATP and NADPH, which is then going to be used in the Calvin cycle, okay? The second part is that the light-independent reaction, which occurs in the Calvin cycle. Remember, the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, whereas the light-dependent reactions occurs in the thylakoid membrane. So the main point of the light-independent reaction is the fixation of carbon, where CO2 is incorporated into the carbohydrates by the enzyme called RuBisCO. It's very important that you remember the enzyme RuBisCO. Okay, so here's a diagram of the light-dependent reaction. Okay, so the first thing that will happen is that light energy is absorbed by photosystem 2. Remember, photosystem 2 will occur first. However, it's called photosystem 2 because it was discovered second. So even though technically photosystem 2 is what happens first, it's called photosystem 2 because it was discovered second, whereas photosystem 1 happens second. However, it was discovered first by scientists, so they called it photosystem 1. Okay, so let's go back into our conversation. So number 1, light energy is absorbed by photosystem 2. You can see over here. So this excites electrons to a higher energy level, okay? Electrons are excited by a process called resonance transfer. Resonance transfer is when energy is transferred from one electron to another, and then it will cause something called electron transfer, where the electron itself and the energy is transferred to the electron carrier. However, this is just further information. So when the electrons move up, there's going to be an electron hole, which means that the P680, okay, so P680, which is our pigment, is gonna require an electron. So why do plants need water? Well, plants need water because water, when it's split up, it's going to produce an electron. So water is split by light. So the splitting of light is called photolysis. Photo means light. Lysis means split or break apart. So H2O donates an electron to fill the electron hole. So if there's a question that asks you why is water needed in photosynthesis? Well, water is our proton donor, okay? And then the electron is going to transfer through the electron transport chain, which is a series of proteins called a plastoquinone. However, for A level, all you need to know is that it's just going to go through the electron carriers. So electrons are going to move down the electron transport chain. This releases energy, which makes ATP by a process called chemiosmosis. Remember, this side is inside the thylakoid lumen, and this side is the stroma. I put a star next to the electron transport chain because there's a whole process that occurs in the electron transport chain, which I will explain in the next slide. So, as the electrons move down the electron carrier and the electron transport chain, the electrons are going to become weaker and have less energy. Remember over here how we have water donating the electrons? Over here we have a low energy electron which is donated. In addition, we're going to have light energy which excites electrons. So a low energy electron is donated from the electron transport chain. Light is absorbed by photosystem 1, which excites the electrons again to a higher energy level. Okay, then electrons are transferred to NADP along with a proton. Now, this is called NADP plus reductase. Okay, this is an enzyme and a protein, because proteins are enzymes. So it's going to make NADPH, which is called reduced NADP. Now, this NADPH is used in the Calvin cycle. Okay, now let's talk about the electron transport chain. So the excited electrons lose energy as they move down the electron transport chain. Okay, this energy is used to transport protons into the thylakoid. The thylakoid now has a higher concentration of protons than the stroma. So over here, our protons are going to be moving into our thylakoid lumen. So protons are going to move from the stroma and through the thylakoid lumen. This is going to create a high concentration gradient of protons. These protons are going to go through the ATP synthase, which is going to make us ATP. ATP is going to be released in the stroma. So protons move down their concentration gradient into the stroma via the enzyme called ATP synthase. The movement of the protons releases energy, which combines ADP and the inorganic phosphate to form ATP. This process is called chemiosmosis. So, the next step is cyclic photophosphorylation, or sometimes called the cyclic cycle. So why is cyclic photophosphorylation important? Well, because the Calvin cycle uses more ATP than NADPH. So the cyclic cycle, okay, makes ATP. Okay, so cyclic photophosphorylation only produces ATP. So it only uses photosystem 1, and it's called cyclic because the electrons from the chlorophyll molecule aren't passed on to NADP, but they are passed back to photosystem 1 via electron carriers. This means the electrons are recycled and repeatedly flow through photosystem 1. This process does not produce any reduced NADP or O2. It only produces small amounts of ATP so that the amount of ATP and NADPH can be balanced when the Calvin cycle occurs. The next important part of the photosynthesis is the light-independent reaction, also known as, well, aka the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma, and it makes a molecule called triose phosphate, which is called G3P. So it's called a cycle since ribulose biphosphate is regenerated. Okay, the enzyme that fixes carbon is RuBisCO. Okay, so the Calvin cycle. So we have CO2, which gives us 1 carbon. Now we're going to have 2 glycerate 3-phosphate, and then we're going to have ATP, which is hydrolyzed to give energy, and then it will release 2 ADP and PI. We have 2 NADPH, which donates a hydrogen, and it's going to give us 2 NADP, and then this is going to give us 2 triose phosphate, which is 3 carbon. We also call it G3P. Now G3P is going to be used to make glucose. We have further ATP to make ribulose biphosphate to regenerate, and then we have a complete cycle. Now this must happen 6 times to produce 1 molecule of glucose. So 3 turns of the cycle produce 6 molecules of triose phosphate, because 2 molecules of TP are made every 1 CO2 molecule. 5 out of the 6 of these TP molecules are used to regenerate ribulose biphosphate. This means that for 3 turns of the cycle, only 1 TP is produced that's used to make a hexose sugar. A hexose sugar has 6 carbons, though, so 2 TP molecules are needed to form 1 hexose sugar. This means the cycle must turn 6 times to produce 2 molecules of TP that can be used to make 1 hexose sugar. 6 turns of the cycle need 18 ATP and 12 reduced NADP from the light-dependent reaction. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want me to make a video that goes through photosynthesis questions specifically for A-level at Excel International, just let me know in the comments and I will post one shortly, or I will make any other videos that you guys want me to do. Thank you.